Shalom, shalom lechem, anashim tovim, uvruchim habaim la'arutz hakatan sheli hayom. Today, Yom Shishi higia vehuba b'diuk hazman. The sixth day of the week is here, Friday, and it came b'diuk hazman, just in time. TGIF, for real. Today, I want to talk to you very briefly about the fact that the Torah in its entirety is one commandment. It's one commandment. Now, I'm not sure if you were aware of that or not, so I'm humbly bringing it to your attention. Where do you get this notion from, David? After all, we've heard the rabbinic types say that there are 613 commandments. And if you cut open a rimon or a pomegranate and you count the seeds, there are 613 of those that match. Tradition, tradition, tradition. Cutesy thought. I love rimonim pomegranates, by the way. They're very delicious. But this is all tradition and can be on its face proven to be false easily. Now, I won't speak ill of people who count commandments and come up with whatever they do, or maybe they can bend over backwards and try to come up with 613. But the bottom line is that primarily that is tradition. But how do we know? How do you know, David? Little simple guy from Palestine, Texas. How do you know that the Torah in and of itself is one commandment? Well, think about the words of Paul in Romans chapter 7, I believe, verse 12, where he says, the commandment, singular, the commandment is holy, okay, and it is righteous and good, he says. He says the commandment. And we know that in the greater context of Romans chapter 7, he is speaking of the Torah, by the way, which he also says, HaTorahi ruhanit, ruhanit. The Torah, it is spiritual. It is spiritual. That conflict between ruach vebasar, ruach vebasar, spirit and flesh. Okay, so why does Paul use the language that the Torah is one commandment? In order to find this, we have to go back to the foundation of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, the foundation of the Bible. I want to point your attention to Sefer Devarim Perek Shesh, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. You think I'm going straight to the Shema, but no, I'm not. I'm going to the verses before the Shema. Okay, verse number 1 primarily. Okay, right before the Shema, and it establishes the fact that the Torah is one commandment. Now, before we go any further, David, well, wait a minute. What about civil, ceremonial, blah, 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 and all of these other things, right? Sure. Men have divvied up the commandments of the Most High. And in some cases, it has some merit, not that it separates it by quantity, but I guess they kind of divvied it up based on what these commandments are for. But I'm telling you in a nutshell that that's not biblical. It's not correct, okay? Sure, there are commands that deal with whether you're in the land in Israel proper or not, whether you're a woman, okay, whether you're a man, whether you're a priest, and all of these other things. But the Torah is one command. If we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1, listen to this. This is where Paul gets the notion. All right, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1. Check this out. It says, Vezot hamitzvah. Vezot hamitzvah. And this is the commandment singular. Notice it didn't say ve'ele hamitzvot. These are the commandments. No, it says Vezot hamitzvah. And this is the commandment. Hachukim, which means the regulations or the decrees. Vehamishpatim, and the judgments. Asher tziva Adonai Elohechem. ללמד אתכם לעשות בארץ אשר אתם עוברים שמה לרשתה. This is the commandment, separate by itself, plus the chukim, which are the decrees or regulations that sometimes they don't make very much sense, like this week's or next week's, I believe, is the red heifer, and the mishpatim, the judgments, right? Which the Most High, your Elohim, has commanded you, right? Lelamed etchem, to teach you to do in the land which you are crossing over to inherit. And then a little bit later, of course, the very famous verse comes up, which is verse 4 of that same chapter, which reads, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, or Shema Israel, Yahuwah Eloheinu, Yahuwah Echad, whichever pronunciation you use. I'm not going to beat you up. You're among friends here, okay? You're among friends. All right. So it is one single commandment, you guys. The entire Torah is a single commandment, plain and period. In line with that thought, I want to point your attention over to the book of Mark in the Brit Chadashah, the book of Mark, chapter number 12, starting at around verse 29, okay? And I'm thinking along the lines of something that I believe is really important for our community today. I'm going to tell you this and shock you this, ladies and gentlemen, because I know you're so used to hearing impassioned messages about who the people are, okay? Who the people are not. Jerusalem is really over here in this place in the middle of South Africa or in the middle of the Congo, or Jerusalem is actually on the east coast of the United States. The earth is flat. Aliens are watching, and they are actually the angels who are going to evacuate us away in our version of a quote unquote rapture. None of that stuff. None of that stuff. I'm going to say something to you very radical today. Very radical today. You and I need to love our fellow man as we love ourselves, regardless of who or he or she is, where they come from, what language they speak. You and I, need to love our fellow man as ourself. Well, that's in line because in Mark chapter 12, verse 29, there is what do you call it? It's a vikuach, an argument or quarrel going on between a group of certain religious types and a scribe, a sofer, approaches Yeshua, and he asks Yeshua the very question. He asks him, he says to him, Ezohi ha-mitzvah harishona mikol. Ezohi ha-mitzvah harishona mikol. What is the first of all commandments? Meaning, what is the greatest of all commandments? In verse 29, Ana Yeshua answered, Harishonahi, the first one it is, Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. He answers and gives him the first and greatest commandment, but he gives him Shema. And it doesn't sound like a commandment, does it? But yes, it is, because the word Shema, to hear or to pay heed, Shema, means to listen with the intention of doing that which you have been asked. Okay? That is the command. Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. That is the command. And then he gives, right, underneath that, what he would consider, all right, to be attached to that, the greatest of commandment, the greatest of the whole commandment, and its counterpart. He continues by saying in verse 30, Ve'ahavta את יהוה אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל שכלך ובכל מאודיך. You shall love the Most High with all your heart, soul, with all of your intellect, שכלך, ובכל מאודיך, and with all of your muchness is what it would translate out to, מאודיך, with all of your muchness, everything that you are. And then he says this. He doesn't stop there. He gives an extra. He gives an extra. He says, V'hashniya, verse 31, V'hashniyahi, and the second one it is, Ve'ahavta le'ra'ocha kamocha. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Ein mitzvah. There is no commandment. Again, he's using singular language here. Ein אין מצווה אחרת גדולה מאלה. אין מצווה אחרת גדולה מאלה. There is no greater commandment than this. Now you also note, all right, you also note that in the parallel witnessing of this conversation in Matthew 22, I want to say in Matthew 22, he says, Yeshua is recorded as saying, Al shte hamitzvot ha'ele, al shte hamitzvot ha'ele, on these two commandments, talui, hangs or depends, et kol haTorah ve'et kol hanevi'im. All of the Torah and all of the prophets depend and hang on these two commandments. They are the basis and the foundation of the whole body of the Torah. But it is a singular command. Okay, what good does it do, brothers and sisters? And I say this with love. What good does it do to not eat pork, not eat shellfish? What good does it do to go to Shabbat piously, okay, every Shabbat? What good does it do to wear fringes and for women to dress modestly and cover their heads and all of these other things if you hate your fellow man, if you have a deep disdain or dislike for someone that does not share your skin color, if you have a deep disdain or dislike for someone who you've received dubious information about? This person or these people groups have your worst intentions, or they have the worst intentions for you. We have to be better than what was done to us, okay? And we have to take the Mashiach at his word. He also says that we need to be melach ve'or, salt and light. We need to be salt and light to the world, and we cannot be that if we look down on our Palestinian neighbor, if we look down on our Indian, Native American, or Indian Far East neighbor, or if we look down on our Ashkenazi Jewish neighbor, run tell that because I said it, okay? No one should be treated like dirt. Also remember the words of the Apostle Paul in the second chapter of the book of Philippians, where he said, don't do anything with vain conceit, okay? Or seeking your own self lifting up, but esteem every man as higher than yourself. It's got to start with us. It's got to start with us, all right? So that's all I'm going to say on that topic. And it's just a little piece of bread for you that you can have, of course, to go along with your challah if you're having challah for Erev Shabbat, but a little something to chew on. I feel as though mainstream Christendom has abandoned the basis of the Torah because it's not sexy, because it's not clickbait, to love your neighbor as yourself and love the Most High with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. We have to do better. We have to be better. We even have another example that you will find in the Talmud in Shabbat 31a. And I mentioned this in my video called The Law of Messiah on One Foot. I would recommend you take a peek at that if you get a chance. It's a little long, but I would recommend that you take a peek at that. And in the video, I explain that this is the big misunderstanding in the world of Protestant Christianity, where they assume that there are only two commandments and that none of the rest of it matters. And we also believe, a lot of us believe, that this is where this thought process was also fostered. It's in Shabbat 31a in the Talmud where Rabbi Shammai and Hillel are featured, and the famous story of the proselyte who approached Shammai, who was of the more conservative, very strict, very rigorous, probably needed a laxative, that guy, and needed to drink more water, but he was very rigid. And the prospective proselyte approached him, and the guy was a provocateur, no doubt about that. He approaches Shammai and he says, Rabbi, how many Torahs do you have? He says, we have the written one from Moshe, and we have the Torah Sheba al Peh, the one that is oral. So he says, I don't believe in the oral Torah, but gereni, he says, convert me on the condition that you teach me the entire written Torah while I stand on one foot. Shammai, who was known as a builder, always carried a amat binyan, which is basically saying a ruler's, a carpenter's ruler, okay, a big measuring device. Amat comes from the word amma, which is a cubit. Okay, an Egyptian cubit is from the bottom of the elbow to the fingertip. I'm a bit of an antediluvian creature, so this is much more than 18 inches. But it was basically a modern, it would be a tape measure, like a nun, an angry old nun's yardstick. So when the guy said this, he smacked the guy with the stick and knocked him down and sent him away with a rebuke, right? The same guy goes to the more liberal, the more patient, orech ruach, the long-spirited Hillel. And he says the same thing to him. He says, hey, teach me the entire Torah under the circumstance that you teach it to me while I'm standing on one foot. Hillel converted the guy, but he tells him this: that which is hateful to you, don't do it to another human being. And he says, the rest is all commentary. Now go and learn. And he sent him away. Now, the last part is what I want to concentrate on. All the rest is commentary. It's not that Hillel, chas v'chalila, it's not that Hillel was dismissing the Torah as a whole by making that statement. But what he's saying is that there's a basis and a foundation of it. That's one of them. You might ask yourself, well, why didn't he mention loving the Most High with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul? He didn't have to, you guys. Even though this guy was a ger, or a potential convert, he knew, okay, it's assumed that he knew that one of the primary pillars of becoming a convert would be to love your creator. So it's an argument from silence, much like, again, modern Christendom loses sight of the importance of keeping Shabbat, sacred time and sacred space. Well, Jesus, hallelujah, Jesus didn't reiterate the importance of the Sabbath when he was here, so therefore it must not be important. No, again, he came to his own folks, and they were fresh off of captivity, specifically for breaking all of the Shabbatot, the land Sabbaths, the weekly Sabbath, and X, Y, and Z, which is why they were in Babylon for 70 years, right? So a lot of fences were built by the conquering house or the prevailing house of Hillel, which won the day over Shammai's house. And a lot of extra and excessive things were added. And I would say, in my honest opinion, with the best of intentions, fences were added to protect the actual commandment, and they became tedious, too heavy. And Yeshua makes mention that how you tie, he says to the Pharisees, the descendants of Hillel's house, you tie the people down with a bunch of burden. Okay, you don't lift a finger in order to help them. Okay, so in that exchange, he says all the rest is commentary. But it seems as though not only just the Christians, okay, but also in the Messianic movement, Hebrew roots movements, the various Israelite movements, X, Y, and Z, no one wants to talk about the words of the Messiah, okay? They want to talk about their own points that feed their anger, okay, which feed their misplaced hate, okay, their targeting of other people groups. Any need to elevate oneself at the detriment of other people is wicked, brothers and sisters. It's wicked to its core, because we cannot judge an entire group of people based on a sampling of the folks, much as the way that people do us. We know better than this, and we need to be better than this. So love your neighbor, love your fellow man, pray for him, her, whoever she is, especially those who need to know that Yeshua is the Mashiach, that he is the Kohen HaGadol who stands in the presence of the Most High, making intercession for us, especially those who need to know, especially those who have forms of godliness but deny the power, that do all of the things but don't bear the fruit. Check your tree, check my tree. Some things need to be lopped off. Everybody needs to hear that Yeshua is the Messiah, especially the Ashkenazi Jewish people who don't know him. They need to know, and they won't know, and they're not going to hear from you if your eyebrows are arched angrily and you're giving them the drop dead look, again, based on some very sketchy information, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't matter, and I have to speak to this here at the end. It doesn't matter what you've been led to believe about the origins of different people, okay? It ultimately does not matter. Obey the Messiah. Obey the Messiah. And if you find that the way you feel about different people, based on the things that you've heard, does not match any of the fruits of the Spirit, check your tree. Check your tree. In the end, isn't it the truth, ultimately, that we're pursuing to be the models, to be the kings and priests, that royal priesthood, that holy nation? Yeah. So with that, that's all for today. The Torah is one single commandment. Love him, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Okay? Shabbat shalom, everybody.